In the wake of the memorable events of January 6, intense battles unfolded in political circles, leaving an indelible mark on subsequent developments. The transfer of power, intended to be a model of organization and stability, devolved into chaos and disarray, sparking a storm of public outrage. At the epicenter of the scandal was a close advisor to the newly elected president, accused by the transition team of corruption and abuse of office. According to the accusers, the official offered high-ranking government positions in exchange for monetary rewards, causing widespread public outcry and undermining trust in the government. The Department of Justice under Donald Trump took an ambiguous stance on crimes related to the events of January 6. According to a new interpretation of the law, any offense, even indirectly resulting from those events, was not subject to prosecution. This amnesty covered a wide range of crimes, from minor violations to serious criminal acts, such as possession of illegal weapons or explosives. The transfer of power, which should have been a symbol of continuity and stability, turned into an arena of political intrigue and scandals. Society watched with concern, fearing that chaos and disarray could undermine the foundations of democracy and the rule of law. However, instead of the expected order and stability, the country faced chaos and disorganization, which generated a deep sense of anxiety and an awareness of serious problems. After the events at the Capitol, many noted that Trump's actions seemed particularly reckless. Instead of taking responsibility for what happened, he only strengthened his position, behaving as if the attack had not occurred, or worse, as if it were justified. No meaningful attempts were made to calm the public or unite the country. Instead, Trump remained silent, interrupted only by moments when he appeared to spread unfounded claims of election fraud. One of the participants in the assault used his body to break through police barriers and used a police shield against officers. He also sprayed a chemical substance in the face of several officers and participated in the general onslaught of the crowd on the police line. In total, his actions on the Capitol grounds lasted more than 3 hours. In light of his provocative behavior on January 6, refusal to take responsibility, and the need to prevent further offenses, the government recommended that the court sentence him to 168 months in prison. In legal practice, the sentencing memorandum prepared by Department of Justice prosecutor Ashley Akers became a key document in the case, being considered by a judge appointed by the Trump administration. The judge, after carefully reviewing the arguments presented, ruled to imprison the defendant for 12 years, which was somewhat less than the term requested by the prosecution. However, unexpectedly, less than a year after the sentencing, the convicted individual was released. Rachel Maddow, analyzing the situation, emphasized not only the chaotic nature of what was happening but also the potential danger of such precedents. She noted that such actions undermine trust in democratic institutions. If established norms and procedures are ignored, the question arises as to what deterrence will prevent future leaders from abusing power even more. Maddow expressed concern that such instability could trigger an increase in political violence, exacerbate uncertainty, and deepen the divisions in society. Concluding her analysis, she asked a disturbing question: if such behavior is observed before taking office, what might happen if Trump returns to power? Rachel Maddow openly expressed her concern about recent staffing decisions made by Trump. She expressed doubts about the professional suitability of a number of candidates for high office, noting that many of them are wealthy individuals whose interests may conflict with the interests of the state. As an example, she cited Howard Lutnick, proposed for the position of Secretary of Commerce, whose strong ties to the financial sector raise questions about his ability to be objective. Similar concerns are raised by the appointment of Jared Isaacman, an entrepreneur in the space technology sector, as head of NASA, which could lead to a blurring of government responsibilities and personal gain. Tacit agreement with such appointments implies acceptance of a situation that is difficult to justify. The lack of objections and the inability to provide reasonable answers to questions about these appointments indicate internal discomfort among senators. The sense of shame and embarrassment they experienced when asked about the president's decision to pardon 21 people serving time for violent acts against law enforcement officers during the Capitol attack underscores the seriousness of the situation. Some of these senators even had to flee from violence, which makes their silent consent especially problematic. Rachel Maddow also drew attention to the commercialization of the presidential office. She emphasized the active promotion of inauguration-themed merchandise, expressing the opinion that it diminishes the grandeur and significance of the high office. The implementation of such products raises not only ethical questions but also creates a dangerous entanglement of personal commercial interests with the duties of the president. Such a mix of roles can undermine public trust and distract from important tasks of governance. According to Maddow, these actions reflect a disturbing trend of prioritizing personal gain over the interests of public service. By appointing individuals with significant business interests to key positions and actively promoting commercial products, the administration risks damaging the integrity of government institutions. Such steps may lead to political decisions that benefit only the wealthy and influential, sidelining the needs of ordinary Americans. In a decision that sparked widespread public outcry, President Trump pardoned approximately 1,500 people who participated in the January 6 events at the Capitol. This large-scale amnesty also affected well-known figures such as Enrique Tarrio of the Proud Boys and Stuart Rhodes of the Oath Keepers, previously convicted of serious crimes. Rachel Maddow expressed concern about the recent pardons, emphasizing that such decisions call into question the principle of accountability. In her view, the administration is setting a dangerous precedent by absolving those who may have attacked the foundations of American democracy. This can be seen as a signal that politically motivated violence can be justified, which, in turn, could inspire extremist-minded individuals to repeat such actions in the future. Many experts share Maddow's concerns, warning that such acts of pardon may lead to the legitimization of political violence and embolden extremist elements. The lack of tangible consequences for actions against democratic institutions may create the impression among others that they, too, can commit similar acts without fear of punishment. Maddow emphasized the importance of upholding the rule of law, noting that pardoning individuals who sought to overturn the results of democratic elections poses a threat to the fundamental principles of the state. Without proper accountability, the likelihood of repeated attacks on democratic institutions increases, which could lead to increased instability in society. It should be noted that these pardons not only undermine confidence in the justice system but also demonstrate a lack of respect for those who suffered, including law enforcement officers who defended the Capitol from attack. The decision to pardon individuals who attacked law enforcement officers raises serious questions about the value of courage and self-sacrifice displayed by those who stand guard over the country's democratic principles. The question arises in society about potential alternatives in the country's leadership. Let's imagine that Kamala Harris, for example, rather than J.D. Vance, held the position of vice president, and ask ourselves, how would events have unfolded if she, rather than Donald Trump, were now president? Calls for resistance and struggle, sounding from high platforms, do not go unnoticed. But how do these calls translate into concrete actions? What can an ordinary citizen who shares the belief in the need for active resistance do? The figurative expression about the frog in boiling water perfectly reflects the situation when danger increases gradually and people do not have time to realize the critical moment. To avoid a sad fate, it is necessary to be vigilant and critically evaluate what is happening around us. It is important not to remain indifferent to the problems of society, to discuss them with others, to express one's position through letters and appeals to representatives of the authorities. Indeed, not all elected officials demonstrate firmness of conviction and willingness to defend the interests of their constituents. However, it is important to remember that it is active citizenship and concern for what is happening that can become the force that can change the situation for the better. In particular, discussions on the funding of the police and other important aspects of public life should be conducted openly and honestly without populist statements and attempts to manipulate public opinion. In the context of argumentation, a politician could express solidarity with voters, emphasizing the universal feeling of fatigue and disappointment. Recognizing the experience as a challenging period, one might acknowledge the efforts to find effective ways to communicate one's position, anticipating the impending consequences of certain events. Addressing the public, a politician might urge maintaining focus and avoiding distractions, recommending surrounding oneself with like-minded individuals who share an understanding of the current situation. It is important to realize that many of the goals and values pursued today form the foundation of a healthy society. As an example, consider Rachel Maddow's comments regarding the pardons issued by Trump. She identified a deeper issue, the glorification of the events of January 6. Instead of condemning the violence, Trump and his supporters were elevating the rioters, giving them ovations at political rallies. Maddow emphasized that this attitude is not only wrong but also poses a serious threat to society. She insisted that when violence is justified, it gradually becomes socially acceptable. If the storming of the Capitol is justified in the eyes of society, what can stop similar incidents from happening again in the future? She drew attention to how certain political figures openly defended the rioters, portraying them not as criminals but as patriots. In her opinion, such actions undermine the foundations of the rule of law and create a dangerous precedent where political violence can be forgiven if it aligns with a particular goal. Maddow also highlighted the long-term consequences for national unity. How can a country move forward if one part of society views an attempted coup as an act of patriotism? She reminded the audience that democracy functions effectively only when both sides respect the results of elections. Otherwise, when that respect disappears, democracy itself is threatened. Notably, one of Ashley Aker's last actions as a prosecutor at the U.S. Department of Justice was to submit documents dismissing charges against individuals accused in cases she had spent years investigating. The decision to drop the charges was made because these individuals had been pardoned by Donald Trump. Tonight marks an important event. Ashley Akers, who dedicated over 7 years of her life to working at the U.S. Department of Justice as a federal prosecutor and was actively involved in handling cases related to the events of January 6th, is leaving her position. This is one of her last actions within the Department of Justice. She is making her first television appearance to share her thoughts and experiences after leaving office. During the interview, the question arises about the reasons for her departure from the Department of Justice after such a long tenure. Ashley Akers acknowledges that her departure was not planned. Circumstances unfolded unexpectedly. Particular attention is given to her work on cases related to the events of January 6th. It is noted that she may have conducted more trials in these cases than any other prosecutor in the department. In this regard, the question arises of how she feels about the fact that the results of her work, including convictions and sentences handed down, have been nullified by presidential pardons. Ashley Akers frankly admits that it was a terrible experience. She expresses her concern about the pardons that occurred, emphasizing their disturbing nature. The reasons for concern about the events that have occurred are well-founded. These events, in essence, condone violence, which, as prosecutors note, has been observed in courtrooms for years. And this is not just about ordinary acts of violence. Police officers who testified in court emphasized that this day was the worst of their careers. They were not sure if they would be able to return home to their families. Describing what was happening as a scene from a medieval battle, they emphasized that such actions not only encourage violence against law enforcement officers but also undermine the fundamental principles of the rule of law. Judges have repeatedly reminded that the peaceful transfer of power is the cornerstone of democracy, and the crimes related to the events of January 6 directly violated this process. It is important to understand that it is not only about the events of one day but also about what consequences may arise in the future. If leaders do not speak out against political violence, then similar attacks on democratic institutions may happen again. Imagine the picture. Donald Trump may be considering mass pardons for participants in the events of January 6, which is already causing heated discussions. Rachel Maddow draws attention to an even more alarming aspect of this situation. It's not just about pardoning protesters, but about releasing individuals who pose a serious threat to society. The spotlight is on Stewart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers, and Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys. Both have been found guilty of seditious conspiracy, meaning they were involved in a plot against the United States government. Maddow rightly asks, what message does such a pardon send? What happens when the leaders of extremist groups who planned the Capitol attack are set free? The question concerns not only justice but also the safety of citizens. These aren't just protesters caught up in the moment but organizers of an attempted overthrow. History shows that leaders of extremist movements, once freed, often return to their activities, often with even greater influence. What will happen when Rhodes and Tarrio return to leading their groups? What will be the consequences for society? Rachel Maddow suggested that Donald Trump's actions go beyond simple forgiveness, effectively encouraging certain circles. A key point of her concern is the question of accountability. If a president has the power to ignore violations of democratic principles, what deterrence will prevent future leaders from committing even more serious abuses? Maddow concludes her reflections with a disturbing question. It's not just about the lessons of the past, but about America's ability to prevent similar situations in the future. Robert De Niro, known for his uncompromising criticism of Donald Trump, has repeatedly called the former president a gangster, implying that his actions are dictated by a mentality inherent in mafia structures. In one interview, De Niro stated that Trump does everything like a gangster, expressing doubt that members of the criminal underworld would approve of such behavior. De Niro's portrayal of Trump as a gangster carries significant cultural weight. As an actor famous for his roles in iconic mafia films, his comparison resonates deeply with audiences familiar with such archetypes. Such a characterization implies that Trump's actions are motivated by personal gain and disregard the well-being of the country. The question arises, are democratic foundations really at risk in the upcoming elections? There is a perception that democratic values are taken for granted by many. The very word democracy has lost its original significance in the eyes of some, and its true meaning is slipping from understanding. In the context of right and wrong, the actions of certain individuals are deeply concerning. The behavior of such people sometimes seems aimed at provoking a reaction, at committing acts that cause horror. The motives for such actions remain unclear, but their repetitive nature cannot fail to raise concerns. The influence of celebrities on public opinion is a subject of debate. While some may listen to the opinions of well-known figures, others dismiss their views, believing that celebrities lack political competence. Nevertheless, the involvement of celebrities such as Robert De Niro in political life draws attention to important issues, reaching audiences who may remain outside of traditional political channels. Rachel Maddow emphasizes that critical engagement with power is not just a right, but also a civic duty. In a democratic society, leaders must serve the interests of the people, not the other way around. When a president has unlimited power to make decisions, it undermines the foundations of a democratic system. Rachel Maddow emphasizes that in matters of pardons, political strategies, or personnel appointments, society has an inherent right and obligation to demand transparency and accountability. She pays particular attention to the ethical and legal aspects of pardons issued by the Trump administration. The mass pardon of individuals involved in the events of January 6 is not just a controversial decision, but also sets a disturbing precedent. Maddow warns that if a president can annul crimes against democracy with a single decree, it opens the door to abuse by future leaders. If such actions go without due attention and criticism, it creates a dangerous trend. A sense of powerlessness and disgust arises when faced with such decisions and trying to find a way to adequately comment on them without experiencing internal discomfort. The inability to find a rational or truthful explanation for Trump's release of 21 prisoners from jail causes deep disappointment. At the heart of any healthy society is open dialogue. Maddow called on the citizens of America to take an active stance, to stop being passive observers and become active participants in the political process. Questions concerning the decisions made by the president should not be viewed through the lens of partisan preferences. They are, first and foremost, matters of accountability. Regardless of whether a Republican or a Democrat occupies the highest office, their actions demand careful analysis, broad discussion, and, if necessary, open challenge. Maddow concluded her remarks with a powerful statement: democracy cannot exist in automatic mode, it requires constant attention and vigilance from citizens. If leaders are not held accountable for their actions, the abuse of power becomes inevitable. The problem is not only what Trump has already done, but also what could happen if no one stops the next leader from even more serious violations. In closing, Maddow invited viewers to share their thoughts in the comments section, as well as to show their support for the channel by liking and subscribing for updates. Additional video materials are available for viewing.